our favorite topics here on Scoreboard is pork. Not because we like it, but we like to focus on it, where your federal tax dollars are used essentially to help individual senators and congressmen get votes in their communities. And tonight we're taking aim at one of Washington's pork kings, Alaska Senator Ted Stevens. Stevens, you'll recall, failed to get a $452 million bridge to nowhere. But now he's pushing a high-speed ferry that connects Anchorage to Port McKenzie, a remote area employing 40 people. The cost to taxpayers, an estimated $70 million. Fox News Channel Dave Springer's got the story from Anchorage.
David, we're at the port of Anchorage looking across the Cook Inlet at a place that once again finds itself in the center of a controversy over congressional pork. This is Port McKenzie, Alaska, where you're more likely to see moose than people. But next year, thanks to massive budget earmarks secured by Senator Ted Stevens, you'll soon also see this $70 million ferry, a pork barrel project that's raised some concerns, just as its predecessor, the Bridge to Nowhere, did 2 years ago.
In the midst of a recession, in the midst of two wars, in the midst of a lot of uncertainty about how the bridge will be built, a lot of uncertainty about the size of the ferry, it's not an appropriate project.
The Susitna ferry can carry up to 25 cars and will run 4 times a day, taking passengers to and from Anchorage. Though only 3 miles away as the crow flies, the drive to Port McKenzie from Anchorage takes 2.5 hours around the Kinnick Arm. The high-speed ferry will make it in just 25 minutes.
People in the lower 48 would not stand for driving 2.5 hours to get to their place of work. They wouldn't do it in hazardous conditions.
They envision the ferry bringing a flood of new jobs and residents into the area, turning this wilderness into a bustling suburb of Anchorage. While that may one day prove to be true, critics say it didn't belong in the defense budget.
I don't think anyone could argue that building a ferry that has been rejected by the Pentagon for defense purposes is going to do anything to enhance our national security.
Senator Stevens' office responded, quote, "This project is actually a prudent use of taxpayers' money because test vessels like this one usually end up in the junkyard." The senator says the Navy will study how the new ice-breaking technology performs in the brutal conditions of the Cook Inlet, a claim the Navy, which rejected funding for the ferry, has not confirmed. The senator says the Navy will study how the ferry performs in the brutal conditions of the Cook Inlet, a claim the Navy, which rejected funding for the ferry, has not confirmed. David, back to you.
All right, thanks very much. Well, Representative Jeff Flake joins us now from Washington, D.C., and for those who've forgotten, he is one of the best fighters of pork inside the Beltway. Good to see you, Congressman.
Thanks for having me on.
So were we able, are we focusing on the right target here? Because it appears that there is no worse example of pork than than this ferry to nowhere.
Yeah, it has a lot of contenders, certainly. And when you had just under 12,000 earmarks last year, there are a lot of bad ones. But this one has got to rank right near the top. $20 million for this project.
And you know what gets me is that the ferry alone is now expected to cost $58 million, and that's nearly double the Navy's original $29 million cost.
Right. So the $20 million this year is only a down payment on it. We'll obviously see more earmarks for the remainder of the money.
Do we just have to let it roll now that it's started?
Well, I think that unless the president somehow finds a way to get it out of there, it's there. That's the problem with these earmarks. The administration nearly always, no matter how these earmarks end up in the bills or just in report language accompanying the bills, the administration nearly always funds it.
Now, what really kills me, and you find this so often in these cases, we've talked about it with regard to Congressman Murtha. Lockheed Martin was involved in the design of this thing, and Lockheed's lobbyists include Senator Stevens' brother-in-law. Now, we should mention that he claims that he knew nothing about this, that even though he was paid $420,000 to lobby on defense spending issues from 2002 to 2006, that this particular project he was not involved with. But, you know, I'm sorry, where there's smoke, very often there's fire.
Well, if it's not family members, then it's typically former staff. One common thread that you'll often find is a member of that congressman or that senator's staff will leave the office and then go work for a lobbying firm and then secure a big earmark like this one. There was an example in the Washington Post of another $7 million defense earmark where that occurred. The chief of staff left, and a year later, $7 million earmark for the client that he represented. So this really is corrupting, and we really got to reverse course here in the Congress.
And Congressman Murtha, correct me if I'm wrong, but his brother's a big lobbyist inside the Beltway too, right, for defense projects?
I can't confirm that, but we have far too many examples like this.
By the way, and just to say, and we always emphasize this is a bipartisan issue. Congressman Murtha is a Democrat. Senator Stevens is a Republican. So this goes on both sides of the aisle, right, Congressman?
It certainly does. Both parties are deep in the trough together.
Now, the last time you and I talked, there was a chance that you were going to get on the Appropriations Committee, correct?
Yes, that possibility still.
We told the folks out there, our loyal scoreboard viewers, that if you really cared about pork, if you want to get rid of pork, you should write to Chairman John Boehner, or John Boehner, who has the power to affect whether you're going to be on that committee. What has happened since then?
Well, they got so many calls and emails that they postponed the decision for a week, and the decision will now be made after the Republican retreat that starts tomorrow and goes through Saturday.
And you mean retreat in two senses there. One, a place that they go to, and they're retreating. But we should emphasize, viewers, don't stop now. Continue to lobby John Boehner, Congressman John Boehner. He has the power to put this man who does care about pork on that committee. And again, you wouldn't have the final say, but you would have some influence in stopping pork, correct?
Well, it would open another front in addition to the House floor where we could attack these earmarks, yes.
Stay with us if you can, Congressman. We want to welcome back our board of directors, John Layfield from Fox Business, Fortune senior editor Lee Gallagher, and Remax Fairlawn realtor Tom Atkins. Is there anything, Tom, that makes you more upset about Beltway politics than pork?
No. It drives me
Very
crazy.
simple.
When they take my money and they spend it on stupid programs that don't work, I go crazy. And that's probably about, I would say with no exaggeration, about half the money we spend.
And John, what can we do about it? I mean, we are where the money comes from. We should have some influence about where it goes.
We have got to shine a light on it like this congressman from Arizona is doing. Look, these guys would be indicted and thrown in jail if they were in corporate America and they weren't congressmen. We have the most inept group of congressmen I have ever seen in the developed world.
And John, if they were in Texas, we'd horsewhip them first.
Lee, are we in the media, you and I, doing enough to focus the spotlight on what's going on with regard to pork?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that the press, takes a critical eye at Congress. I mean, and the government. I mean, there's lots of inefficiencies. They get away with a lot of rules. But you know how it works in Washington.
Inside the Beltway, for those, I grew up in Washington, so I know it pretty well. Inside the Beltway, there's this kind of chummy relationship that develops between congressmen, senators, and the press. In order to get the good interviews, you have to be good to the congressmen, senators. And sometimes we overlook things.
You know what? The same thing happens with press and corporate America. I mean, a lot of that is, companies spend tons of money trying to woo the press.
But in the appropriation bill, bill for Iraq, there was $100,000 for a Punxsutawney Field Museum.
That's right.
At some point, you got to shine a light on these guys and say, you are stealing taxpayers' money.
And Congressman Flake, that's the worst. I mean, pork itself is bad, but when porkers take advantage of the national security crisis that we're in because of 9/11 in order to get some of their pork in, there's nothing worse than that.
You bet. There was most of the money, the largest percentage came out of the defense bill. That's because members of Congress know that they can hide it well there. In fact, there was an earmark, for example, for something called a hand warming system, a couple $1 million to a private company. That to you and me is a glove. But if you call it a system,
is that serious? They called a glove a hand warming system?
Yes. Yes, and so I mean you'll.
By the way, who was behind
that?
Can you name a name?
I don't recall.
Come on.
But there were nearly 2,000, or just over 2,000 earmarks in the defense bill, and like you said, it's both parties here, and we just. I hope that Republicans can get out front and say that we're just going to have a moratorium this year.